If you've hung around this channel for any length of time, you will know that I am a massive fan of historical fiction, especially historical fiction written by women, and I have recently dug into the works of Kiran Millwood Hargrave, and I really want to talk about how great she is. Kiran Millwood Hargrave has written a bunch of children's books, some plays, poetry, and then eventually a YA novel and a adult historical fiction novel, and I want to talk about both of these. I haven't read any of her plays, poetry, or children's books, but I have now read The Mercies, her adult novel, and The Deathless Girls, her YA novel. I think I'm going to start with The Deathless Girls because that's the one I read first, and it was the one that she wrote first, and it leads into The Mercies quite nicely, and I'll explain why in a second. So as I said, after writing some children's books, Kiran Millwood Hargrave wrote this, The Deathless Girls. This is a YA novel that the blurb clearly states is the origin story of the Brides of Dracula, which is so cool. Okay, so this is cool for me for a bunch of reasons. One, I love Gothic literature to death. Frankenstein is my favourite novel. I'm a huge fan of Dracula. Dracula is written in a style that I really like, where it's all letters and diary entries. I'm also a big fan of Dracula because it's gay as hell. Dracula is so queer, it's so camp, and it's just fun. And I'm a big fan of Dracula because a few winters ago, I can't even remember which one because time is meaningless, I spent my Christmas and New Year in Romania. I lived there for about 6 weeks. We were based in Bucharest, but we took a week-long trip up into Transylvania. We went to Bran Castle, which is the castle that supposedly inspired Dracula, even though Bram Stoker definitely never went to Romania. And we went to Sighișoara, which is the town where Vlad the Impaler, the actual Dracula, was born. So I learned a lot about Dracula, who he really was, the man who inspired the legend that became the myth, that became the novel, and how all of that happened. And it really is fascinating. And fortunately, if you go on our blog, you can read some articles that we did about our time there and the things that we learned when we went to Sighișoara, Bran Castle, and other parts of Wallachia and Transylvania. It's a really incredible part of the world, and I'm so glad that we went there, and I really want to go back. Don't drive, though. Driving in Bucharest is absolutely terrifying. Don't do it. So anyway, I'm a huge fan of Dracula, the man, the myth, the legend, all of it. And this is the origin story of the, again, mythological Brides of Dracula. Our two protagonists are twin girls, Lil and Kizzy. Lil is our narrator. She is our first-person protagonist, and Kizzy is there all the way through the novel alongside her. And you know that the story is going to end with them becoming the Brides of Dracula. They begin as travelers, members of the traveler community, who are and have always historically been abused and treated as second-class citizens in almost every country that they exist in. This is a theme that I noticed in this book and in The Mercies, is that Kiran Millwood Hargrave likes to give attention to people who are of minority groups, as well as native and indigenous peoples. So we've got two travellers who, at the beginning, are returning to their camp and see that their camp is being ransacked by a bunch of soldiers. They are captured, they are enslaved, and they are thrown into the back of a cart. Their younger brother escapes with the bear that they have as part of their camp, and all of the adults are slaughtered, including their mother. And the seer. There is a seer who is part of their camp who does this kind of divining thing that involves palm reading and kind of says what their path will be as they grow up, and these two girls are about to get to that day where their palms are read, and it doesn't happen. They're kidnapped and they're taken to this castle. From here, Lil and Kizzy have become slaves. They are working in a kitchen of this castle. All of the people that are controlling them and withholding them are horrible, monstrous people, men and women alike. And then they meet a bunch of other servants and slaves within the castle, especially the cook, who turns out to also be a traveller and actually had a relative that was in their camp, and things start to sort of piece together. Alright, here's what's going to happen. I've got a cat. This is Snowy. I love Snowy. Snowy is going to be put down in a second, and then... Not put down. I'm going to put her on the floor. I'm going to put her on the floor in a second. Sorry, Snowy. I'm going to put her on the floor, and then she's going to make noises, and you're going to hear those noises, and you're going to ignore them, and you're going to try and be quiet if you can, right? Okay, right. There, go. Be free. God, she molts. It doesn't matter what time of year, she molts all the time. Can't be good for my lungs. I'm not going to tell you any more about the Deathless Girls, because I think I've said everything I need to. Lil and Kizzy, Traveller Girls, eventually are going to become the Brides of Dracula. There is a cool bit where they have their palms read, and it says that they don't have a death line. Neither of them are destined to die. And so this leads into Dracula. One cool thing, actually, sorry, I did think of something else. Dracula himself exists as this really cool shadow in the background of the entire novel. Everyone in their area of Romania knows about him. He is known as the Dragon. Because I remember when I learned about him when I was in Romania, his father, Dracul, was the dragon. Dracul means dragon, and he was known as the Dragon, and then he had a son who was Vlad the Impaler, who was the son of Dracula. No, wait, he was the son of Dracul, Dracula, and that's where we get the name from. I think I got that right. But anyway, in this novel, he is known as Dracul or the Dragon, and he is a man of myth. At the time, this was kind of the origin of propaganda, where Vlad did some really, really horrible things. Like, he's called the Impaler because he literally used to get giant tree trunks and have people sharpen them into enormous spikes and then impale people on them, like all the way down. And then those people would die there, slowly, bleed to death, and then he would just line the roads with them so that people would ride past on horseback and be terrified and intimidated. This led to propaganda, which embellished these stories even further and talked about how he would drink the blood of his enemies, and then that became the legend of the vampire. At least I think I'm getting that right. And so Kiran Millwood Hargrave in The Deathless Girls kind of expands on that mythology and that idea of the Impaler and turns him into this shadow that exists in the background of the entire novel until eventually you know you're going to come in contact with him. As a YA novel, it's really, really maturely written. It's simple in its themes and its story and its characters. It's very YA in the sense that it's a pretty quick read, it's simple to follow, but it's the writing that is so beautiful. I will read YA all day long as the writing isn't cringe and awkward and just too embarrassing for me to get through. When I've attempted to read Sarah J. Maas in the past, her writing is so incredibly cringe that I turn red trying to read it. The same for Matt Haig, even though his books aren't classified as YA, they are shittily written and I cannot bear to read them. This is not that. This is a fantastic piece of YA full of beautiful, beautiful character writing, descriptions, metaphors, really imaginative use of adjectives and similes. It's beautiful. And that beautiful writing is also carried through into The Mercies. So The Mercies was her first adult novel. It came out last year, I think, and I just got it in paperback. The Mercies is just a step above. I loved The Deathless Girls, but The Mercies is taking a lot of the themes and ideas, even character tropes, I guess, from The Deathless Girls and turning it into something very, very mature, historical, hard-hitting, and gorgeous. If you haven't read it, The Mercies is set in 1617. It is set on an island off the coast of Norway, very, very remote, and one day on Christmas Eve, all of the men, pretty much, in this town, on this island, go out to sea fishing, and like a finger snap, as it's described in the blurb and on the first page, all of these men are wiped out by a storm. And suddenly it's pretty much an island of women. The first few chapters I felt a little bit lost. I felt like I was stumbling through the book and trying to get my grip. I guess because I was moving from a YA book straight into a more literary novel, and her writing style just took some adjusting. And the fact that she was adjusting her writing style and I had to catch up to it just shows how impressive Kiran Millwood Hargrave's writing is. But eventually, about 7-8 chapters in, the perspective shifts from the women on the island who've been adjusting to life without their men to the life of a young woman. This young woman is called Ursula, and she's from the city of Bergen. She was part of a rich family who have fallen on hard times, and so she has been arranged into this marriage to this fucking awful Scottish guy. He's a hardcore church man, The church, actually, in this book is called the Kirke, which I think is the Norwegian word for church, and it's called that all the way through, which I thought was a nice little bit of immersion. But this Scottish guy, who's called Absalom, he is a monster. He is a symbol of religious patriarchy through and through. And she is forced into a marriage with him. She doesn't like it, obviously, but she has no choice but to go on a boat with him to this island where he is going to set it to rights. He's heard, or his boss has heard, that this is now just an island full of women, and it's possible that there's some paganism or at least non-Christian stuff going on the island, and so he has to go there and fix it and use his Christian male rigidity to assert dominance over the island and make sure that they all fall in line. The perspective moves from Ursula's, or Ursa as she's called by people who are nice to her, to Maren. Maren is just one of the girls on the island. She was unmarried but engaged briefly to one of the men who died, and she has a lot of friends on the island, and we kind of go to these different friends. One of them is called Kirsten, and through Maren's eyes you get a sense of all the different women on the island, but then you also get Ursula, and once Ursula arrives with Absalom on the island, we see Ursula and Maren get closer and closer, and everything is in the third person, but you're kind of looking over the shoulder of Ursula or Maren, depending on the chapter. It kind of moves back and forth between them. The Mercies is also separated into 3 parts like a play. I loved that. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. The 3 parts are called Storm, Arrival, and Hunt. So you've got the storm that sets up the entire story. Then you've got the arrival of Ursula and her awful husband on the island. And then you've got the hunt. And I'm not going to tell you what the hunt is or what it involves because you really need to get there for yourself. But these are 3 very clearly delineated acts. It's the setup of the island and the women on it, including the setup of Ursula in Bergen on her way there, and then the second act, which is a little bit slower, is Ursula on the island meeting the women, and she gets to know that there is another way of living. She's got this very rigid Christian church-going husband who is here to set the law for these women, but she is watching the women live their lives and learn to fish and learn to survive without men, and she's very inspired by it. She spends a lot of time with Maren as Maren teaches her how to pretty much look after herself and be self-sufficient, while she then goes to bed with this man who is so awful and has opinions about how women should be. And then that leads us to the third act, the hunt. This is through and through a book about patriarchy, systems of oppression, and women's rights. Kiran Millwood Hargrave is a fantastic feminist writer who has now repeatedly been writing excellent female protagonists who, in the Deathless Girls and the Mercies, have come under systems of oppression, have lost their rights, have lost their autonomy in some way. You've got a pair of girls who are kidnapped and taken in as slaves. You've got a woman who is forced into a marriage that she doesn't like, whilst watching women be free and survive by themselves, almost like through cage bars, and glimpsing at them and touching them whenever she can. And there's also, semi-spoiler I guess, a queer thread going through both novels. In the second half of each novel, queerness comes to light. That's all I'll say. But I was here for it, obviously. So Kiran Millwood Hargrave is very, very interested in women's autonomy, women's rights, celebrating femininity, celebrating feminism, celebrating a woman's right to live as she wishes and be in control and command of her own body, her fate, her choices, etc. She's also not a TERF. She's very anti-transphobic, which is something that I was relieved by. If you live on Twitter as much as I do, it's sad that now we get nervous when it comes to a lot of powerful, strong, feminist women writers. These women have been my icons and my idols for so many years, and they keep turning out to be TERFs over and over again, and it is heartbreaking. Kiran Millwood Hargrave is not. She is not a TERF, she's not a transphobe. This was a huge relief to me. She's awesome. She's great. I love her. So she has these themes that are being repeated all the way through her books, and as I said, the writing of both of these books is just so gorgeous and electrifying. She's very imaginative with her use of descriptive language. I would say it hits harder, actually, in the Deathless Girls, probably because it's YA. And so you've got a very simple story, simple character writing, stripped down, narrow focus, YA adventure story, to use the word adventure loosely. And so the fact that it's injected with this gorgeous, gorgeous writing just stands out against the YA tropes a little bit more. Whereas in the Mercies, the gorgeousness of the writing, you almost take it for granted because it's embedded into a very complex thematic character study and a beautiful exploration of autonomy and femininity and female freedom, etc. Okay, I'm waffling. I'll stop. These are great books. I am so impressed. I am now a very, very big fan of Kiran Millwood Hargrave. She's my age. She's done so much already. I can't wait to see what comes next. The Mercies has been a huge hit. The Deathless Girls is now one of my favourite YA novels, and I cannot wait to read more of her stuff. I really, really recommend these. They are atmospheric, they are dark, they are gothic, they are fun, they are bleak, they are beautiful, they are hard-hitting, they are really gripping, and she's very good at writing characters that you root for and characters that you despise. She's a great character writer, and her prose is just so tasty to read. Oh, I love it. Subscribe for books.